But first, to London, where a parliamentary committee has just released new evidence in its inquiry into the News of the World phone hacking scandal. The committee quizzed Rupert Murdoch, his son James, and former News of the World editor Rebekah Brooks 4 weeks ago. Now it appears James Murdoch may be recalled. With the latest, Europe correspondent Philip Williams joins us now from Late Line's London studio. Phil, there appears to be two new bits of evidence that contradict or at least conflict with what we've heard before.
That's right, and this is just very new information. It's only come through in the last couple of minutes, so we're still sifting through it. But it appears to focus on two elements. One is Clive Goodman. He was the royal reporter from the News of the World that actually went to jail for hacking, and he was the so-called rogue reporter. Now it appears he wrote a letter 4 years ago detailing discussions he'd held in editorial meetings involving Andy Coulson, who was the editor at the time, regarding the hacking as being an everyday occurrence, basically implying that this was well known at the paper and that it was discussed often until Andy Coulson ordered it not to be discussed anymore at those meetings. Now, the second bit of evidence comes from a law firm called Harbottle and Lewis. Now, they were charged with looking at a raft of documents to establish just how involved other reporters or other elements of the news organisation may have been involved in hacking. Now, they say, actually, they had a very, very narrow remit, actually, and they didn't have this broad expanse of investigating every element of this at all. And so when Rupert Murdoch implied that they hadn't done a very good job, they were saying, well, look, we did the job we were asked to do. We just weren't asked to give a very expansive view of that. So the likely consequence of this is that several former News of the World journalists and executives may be asked to come back and give more evidence. And after they've given evidence, it's highly likely that James Murdoch will be asked. It seems that Rupert Murdoch will probably not be asked. He's seen as more remote and not as connected with the day-to-day running of the company. But certainly his son James is in the hot seat.
Phil, certainly these new bits of evidence are pretty explosive. They would seem to have some fairly potentially severe ramifications, I guess, for Andy Coulson and the main players, not just the Murdochs, but Rebekah Brooks as well.
Yes, all of them, and there are now contradictions, severe contradictions, coming from the main players at the time that sat around the tables, the editorial tables, the executive tables of the organisation, and now it's a question of, well, who's right? Whose account do you believe? And it's already been made very clear from Tom Watson, who's on that committee, and from the chair of that committee, that John Whittingdale, that all these accounts cannot be right. They are contradictory. Someone has to be not full and fulsome with the truth, and it's their job now to discover, well, who's right and who's wrong.
And Phil, as you said, I mean, there's likely to be some recalling now of some of these witnesses. To what end? What can this committee ultimately recommend? Can they pass this information on to the police? Can they recommend that there be some sort of prosecution?
Well, ultimately, it's up to them to what they put in their report, and we're not sure what the end date for that all is, and it runs concurrently with police investigations, and they have said before they don't want to do anything that prejudices those investigations, so they're being very cautious about how they introduce new players and what happens to that evidence, and of course whether it is made public, of course. But ultimately what they want to do is get to the bottom of it. Who knew what when, where's the level of responsibility, and so that ultimately their ultimate game is to really sort of say, well, we want this shutdown stopped, that never happens again, and those responsible, all the way from the top to the bottom, suffer the consequences.
Phil Williams in London, many thanks.
Thank you.